On the evening of December 3rd, 1957, snow covered the streets of a quiet American town. Christmas was only a few weeks away. Families were decorating their homes. Children were enjoying the first signs of winter. And in the small town of Sycamore, Illinois, 7-year-old Maria Ridulph was playing outside with her best friend. Nothing about that evening seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that it would become one of the most famous cold cases in American history. Maria was a cheerful second-grade student. She lived with her family in a close-knit community where neighbors knew one another and children often played outside without fear. It was the kind of town where parents felt safe. The kind of town where serious crime was almost unheard of. As darkness settled over Sycamore, Maria and her friend Kathy Chapman continued playing in the snow near the corner of Archie Place. The girls laughed, built snow forts, and enjoyed the winter evening. Then a stranger appeared. According to Kathy, the young man introduced himself as Johnnie. He seemed friendly, relaxed, and comfortable speaking with the children. Nothing immediately alarmed them. The stranger reportedly joked with the girls and even gave them piggyback rides. To a child, he appeared harmless. But within minutes, everything changed. At one point, Kathy realized she had forgotten her gloves. She ran home to get them. The trip would only take a few minutes, perhaps less. She expected to return and find Maria exactly where she had left her. But when Kathy came back, the street was empty. Maria was gone. The stranger was gone. And a mystery had just begun. At first, adults hoped there was a simple explanation. Perhaps Maria had gone home. Perhaps she had walked to another friend's house. Perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. But as minutes turned into hours, concern became panic. Families began searching. Neighbors joined the effort. Police officers arrived and started questioning witnesses. Everyone wanted the same answer. Where was Maria Ridulph? The search quickly expanded. Volunteers combed fields. Roads were checked. Nearby towns were notified. Law enforcement agencies coordinated efforts. Yet despite the growing search, no trace of Maria could be found. The disappearance shocked Sycamore. Children rarely vanished from towns like this. Parents became frightened. Doors were locked. Children were kept closer to home. For many residents, the feeling of safety disappeared almost overnight. Meanwhile, investigators focused on the only significant lead they had, the mysterious young man known as Johnnie. Kathy provided a description. Police created sketches. Witnesses were interviewed. Detectives hoped someone would recognize him. Thousands of tips followed. Some appeared promising. Most led nowhere. Days passed. Then weeks. Still, there was no sign of Maria. As winter turned into spring, hope slowly faded. Yet the search never completely stopped. Investigators continued following leads. The FBI became involved. The case attracted national attention. Even the highest levels of government were aware of the investigation. According to historical reports, President Dwight D. Eisenhower received updates on the case. So did FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. The disappearance of a 7-year-old girl from a small Illinois town had become national news. Then, 5 months after Maria vanished, a grim discovery brought an end to the search. Her body was found in a wooded area more than 100 miles from Sycamore. The news devastated the community. The little girl everyone had been hoping to find alive was gone. Investigators now faced a murder investigation. Medical examination revealed signs of violence. Maria had suffered fatal injuries. The crime shocked even experienced investigators. Someone had abducted a child, transported her far from home, and taken her life. The question was simple. Who did it? The answer would prove far more difficult. Over the following years, detectives pursued countless leads. Potential suspects were identified. Witnesses were questioned. Tips arrived from across the country. Yet none of the evidence was strong enough to solve the case. The mysterious Johnnie remained unidentified. No arrest was made. No trial occurred. And no justice was delivered. As time passed, the investigation gradually became a cold case. New crimes captured headlines. New investigations demanded attention. But in Sycamore, Maria Ridulph was never forgotten. Her family continued searching for answers. Investigators periodically reopened the case. And every few years, someone wondered whether the mystery would finally be solved. Most people believed it never would. After all, witnesses grow older, memories fade, evidence disappears, and cold cases often remain unsolved forever. But decades later, something unexpected happened. A conversation that had taken place years earlier suddenly attracted new attention. A family member came forward. Old memories resurfaced, and investigators discovered a lead that would eventually result in an arrest more than half a century after Maria disappeared into the snow, a development so extraordinary that it would become known as one of the oldest cold case prosecutions in American history. For more than 4 decades, the disappearance and murder of Maria Ridulph remained one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Investigators came and went. Police departments changed leadership. Witnesses grew older, and year after year the case remained unresolved. Many people believed the truth had been lost forever. After all, cold cases become more difficult with time. Memories fade, evidence deteriorates, witnesses pass away, and opportunities disappear. Yet despite these challenges, Maria's case was never completely forgotten. Her family continued seeking answers. Detectives periodically reviewed the investigation, and somewhere within the thousands of pages of reports, investigators hoped the missing piece of the puzzle still existed. Then, decades after Maria's death, an unexpected lead emerged. The breakthrough did not come from modern forensic technology. It did not come from newly discovered DNA evidence. And it did not come from a dramatic confession. Instead, it came from a family memory, one that had remained buried for years. According to investigators, a woman came forward with information involving her mother. The story traced back to the late 1950s, around the time Maria disappeared. The woman reported that her mother had once made statements suggesting that a family member may have been connected to the crime. At first glance, the information seemed difficult to verify. After all, decades had passed. But detectives decided the lead deserved attention. They began examining the details. And slowly, a name emerged. Jack McCullough. Back in 1957, McCullough had been 17 years old. He lived in the Sycamore area. And according to investigators, he resembled descriptions given years earlier by witnesses. For detectives reviewing the case, the similarities immediately attracted attention. The more they investigated, the more interested they became. Old records were reviewed. Witness statements were re-examined. Historical documents were collected. And investigators attempted to determine whether McCullough could have been the mysterious young man known as Johnnie. As the investigation progressed, some witnesses identified photographs connected to McCullough. Others recalled details from decades earlier. Although the passage of time created challenges, detectives believed the evidence was becoming increasingly significant. Eventually, investigators presented their findings to prosecutors. The result shocked many observers. More than 50 years after Maria's disappearance, charges were filed. The arrest attracted national headlines. Many people could hardly believe what they were hearing. A murder committed in 1957 was finally heading to court. The case quickly became historic. Some media organizations described it as one of the oldest cold cases ever prosecuted in the United States. For Maria's family, the development brought renewed hope. For more than 4 decades, the disappearance and murder of Maria Ridulph remained one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Investigators came and went. Police departments changed leadership. Witnesses grew older, and year after year the case remained unresolved. Many people believed the truth had been lost forever. After all, cold cases become more difficult with time. Memories fade, evidence deteriorates, witnesses pass away, and opportunities disappear. Yet despite these challenges, Maria's case was never completely forgotten. Her family continued seeking answers. Detectives periodically reviewed the investigation. And somewhere within the thousands of pages of reports, investigators hoped the missing piece of the puzzle still existed. Then, decades after Maria's death, an unexpected lead emerged. The breakthrough did not come from modern forensic technology. It did not come from newly discovered DNA evidence, and it did not come from a dramatic confession. Instead, it came from a family memory, one that had remained buried for years. According to investigators, a woman came forward with information involving her mother. The story traced back to the late 1950s, around the time Maria disappeared. The woman reported that her mother had once made statements suggesting that a family member may have been connected to the crime. At first glance, the information seemed difficult to verify. After all, decades had passed. But detectives decided the lead deserved attention. They began examining the details. And slowly, a name emerged. Jack McCullough. Back in 1957, McCullough had been 17 years old. He lived in the Sycamore area. And according to investigators, he resembled descriptions given years earlier by witnesses. For detectives reviewing the case, the similarities immediately attracted attention. The more they investigated, the more interested they became. Old records were reviewed. Witness statements were re-examined. Historical documents were collected. And investigators attempted to determine whether McCullough could have been the mysterious young man known as Johnnie. As the investigation progressed, some witnesses identified photographs connected to McCullough. Others recalled details from decades earlier. Although the passage of time created challenges, detectives believed the evidence was becoming increasingly significant. Eventually, investigators presented their findings to prosecutors. The result shocked many observers. More than 50 years after Maria's disappearance, charges were filed. The arrest attracted national headlines. Many people could hardly believe what they were hearing. A murder committed in 1957 was finally heading to court. The case quickly became historic. Some media organizations described it as one of the oldest cold cases ever prosecuted in the United States. For Maria's family, the development brought renewed hope. For decades, they had waited for answers. Now, it appeared justice might finally be within reach. But the road ahead would be complicated. As preparations for trial began, defense attorneys challenged the prosecution's evidence. They argued that memories from half a century earlier could not always be trusted. Witness recollections had changed over time. Important evidence was limited. And much of the case depended on events that occurred decades before. The prosecution, however, believed the evidence pointed clearly toward McCullough. According to prosecutors, witness testimony and investigative findings supported their theory. The trial attracted widespread attention. Journalists filled the courtroom. True crime researchers followed every development, and members of the public closely watched the proceedings. Many viewed the trial as a test of whether justice could still be achieved after more than 50 years. During testimony, jurors heard details about Maria's disappearance. They heard about the snowy evening in Sycamore. They heard about the mysterious young man who approached the children. And they heard about the decades-long search for answers. Perhaps most surprising of all, some members of McCullough's own family provided testimony. Their statements became an important part of the prosecution's case. As the trial continued, emotions ran high. Maria's family listened as painful memories resurfaced. The community once again revisited one of the darkest chapters in its history. And after decades of uncertainty, a verdict finally approached. When jurors reached their decision, the outcome stunned many observers. Jack McCullough was found guilty. More than half a century after Maria vanished into the snow, someone had been convicted of her murder. For Maria's family, the verdict represented a moment they had waited most of their lives to see. The case that many believed would never be solved had finally produced a conviction. Soon afterward, McCullough was sentenced to life in prison. The historic cold case appeared closed. Investigators celebrated. Prosecutors expressed confidence in the outcome, and many people believed justice had finally been delivered. Yet the story was far from over, because hidden within old records was information that would soon raise serious questions about the conviction. Questions involving telephone records, questions involving timelines, and questions that would eventually force investigators, prosecutors, and judges to re-examine everything they thought they knew about the murder of Maria Ridulph. A development that would transform one of America's oldest cold case convictions into one of its most controversial mysteries. The passage of more than 50 years had affected memories. Statements contained inconsistencies, and investigators became increasingly worried that the original prosecution may have relied too heavily on evidence that was not as strong as it first appeared. For Maria's family, the situation was devastating. After decades of waiting, they believed justice had finally arrived. Now uncertainty had returned. Questions that seemed answered were suddenly open once again. The emotional toll was enormous. Meanwhile, legal proceedings moved forward. Defense attorneys argued that the newly discovered evidence fundamentally changed the case. Prosecutors reviewing the matter reached similar concerns. The court was asked to reconsider the conviction. And in 2016, a dramatic decision was announced. Judge William Brady vacated McCullough's conviction. The ruling stunned observers across the country. One of America's oldest cold case convictions had been overturned. After spending years in prison, McCullough was released. The development generated enormous media attention. Many people struggled to understand how a murder case could shift so dramatically. How could a conviction obtained after decades of investigation suddenly collapse? The answer lay in the new evidence. the phone records, the timeline concerns, and the growing belief that the prosecution had failed to fully account for critical facts. Yet even as McCullough regained his freedom, the larger mystery remained unsolved. If he was not responsible, then who killed Maria Ridulph? That question once again confronted investigators. The person who abducted a 7-year-old girl from a snowy street in 1957 remained unidentified. The case that seemed solved was now open once more. Then, in 2017, another major development occurred. A court formally granted McCullough a certificate of innocence. The ruling went beyond simply overturning the conviction. It officially cleared his name. According to the court, the evidence no longer supported the conclusion that he committed the crime. The decision represented a remarkable legal reversal. Few cases in American history had followed such an unusual path. A decades-old murder, a historic conviction, a dramatic release, and ultimately a formal declaration of innocence. For McCullough, it was vindication. For Maria's family, it was heartbreak. And for investigators, it meant returning to the same question that had haunted the case since 1957. Who was responsible for Maria Ridulph's murder? The answer remained hidden. And despite 60 years of investigation, the mystery was not over. Because one final chapter still remained. A chapter about innocence. A chapter about unanswered questions. And a chapter that would leave one of America's oldest cold cases officially unsolved once again. When Judge William Brady granted Jack McCullough a certificate of innocence in 2017, the decision brought an extraordinary legal journey to an end. But it did not solve the murder of Maria Ridulph. In fact, it did the opposite. The ruling returned the case to the same place it had been for most of its history, unsolved. More than 60 years after a 7-year-old girl vanished from a snowy street in Sycamore, Illinois, investigators were once again without a convicted suspect. The announcement generated strong reactions across the country. Some people viewed the ruling as proof that the justice system had corrected a serious mistake. Others believed the original conviction should have remained in place. The debate quickly spread through newspapers, television programs, and true crime communities. Yet regardless of personal opinions, one fact remained unchanged. Maria Ridulph's killer had never been definitively identified. For Maria's surviving relatives, the situation was deeply painful. The family had spent decades hoping for answers. When McCullough was convicted, many believed the long search for justice had finally ended. Now that certainty was gone. The emotional impact was enormous. After nearly 60 years, they were once again facing the same unanswered questions. Who abducted Maria? Who transported her more than 100 miles from home? And who was responsible for ending the life of a 7-year-old child? Unfortunately, the passage of time made finding those answers increasingly difficult. Many original witnesses had passed away. Others could no longer remember critical details. Physical evidence from the 1950s was limited compared to modern standards. Investigative techniques available at the time of the crime were far less advanced than those used today. As a result, detectives faced enormous obstacles. The very thing that made the case historic also made it difficult to solve: time. For decades, time had hidden the truth. Then time helped produce a conviction, and eventually time helped dismantle that conviction as well. The Maria Ridulph case became a powerful example of both the strengths and weaknesses of cold case investigations. On one hand, it demonstrated the remarkable dedication of investigators who refused to abandon an unsolved murder. Even after half a century, detectives continued searching for answers. They reviewed old evidence, followed new leads, and attempted to bring justice to a victim who had been forgotten by no one. On the other hand, the case also revealed the dangers of relying on evidence shaped by the passage of decades. Human memory is imperfect. Witness recollections can change. Details become blurred. And even sincere testimony may not always be accurate after many years. Those realities became central to the controversy surrounding McCullough's conviction. Today, legal experts frequently discuss the case when examining the challenges of historical prosecutions. Investigators study it. Attorneys analyze it. And criminal justice researchers continue debating its lessons. Some view it as a cautionary tale about wrongful convictions. Others view it as an example of how difficult it can be to reconstruct events that occurred generations earlier. Regardless of perspective, the case remains one of the most unusual criminal investigations in American history. It began with a child playing in the snow. It triggered one of the largest searches Illinois had ever seen. It attracted the attention of President Dwight D. Eisenhower and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. It remained unsolved for more than 50 years. It produced one of the oldest cold case convictions ever brought to trial, and ultimately that conviction was overturned. Very few cases follow such a path. Yet perhaps the most important part of Maria's story is not the courtroom battles or the legal debates. It is the victim herself, a 7-year-old girl whose life was stolen far too soon, a child whose family spent decades searching for answers, and a case that continues to remind investigators why every unsolved crime matters. Because behind every file sits a real person. Behind every cold case is a family waiting for answers. And behind every mystery is a truth that someone, somewhere, still hopes will be found. Today, Maria Ridulph's murder remains officially unsolved. The person responsible has never been conclusively identified. No one is currently serving a sentence for the crime. And despite more than 6 decades of investigation, the central mystery remains unanswered. What happened on that snowy December evening in 1957? Who was the man known as Johnnie? And who took 7-year-old Maria Ridulph away from the corner of Archie Place? Those questions continue to echo through one of America's oldest and most controversial cold cases. A case that began with a child disappearing into the winter darkness. And a case that, even today, still waits for its final answer.